built the dream. He built the machine.
The story begins not with golden arches or billion-dollar empires, but with two brothers from Manchester, New Hampshire, who dared to dream of something better. Richard James McDonald, born in 1909, and Maurice James McDonald, born in 1902, grew up in a working-class Irish-American family during an era when opportunity meant leaving home and heading west. Their father worked in a shoe factory, hard, repetitive labor that ground men down year after year. The brothers watched him come home exhausted, watched the factory whistle dictate his life, and they made a silent pact: they would never be factory workers. They would control their own destiny, build their own business, answer to no one but themselves. In 1930, as the Great Depression was tightening its grip on America, the brothers made their move. They left New Hampshire and headed to California, where orange groves stretched to the horizon and the future seemed possible. They were chasing the California dream that drew millions westward: sunshine, opportunity, the chance to build something from nothing. Their first venture was in Hollywood, operating a movie theater. It was modest work, but they learned the entertainment business, learned about customers, learned about managing operations. But the theater business was controlled by the big studios, and the McDonald brothers wanted more independence. In 1937, they opened a food stand near the Huntington Library in Pasadena, serving hot dogs and orange juice to tourists and locals. The food stand was successful enough to convince them they'd found their calling. In 1940, the brothers took their biggest gamble yet. They moved to San Bernardino, a working-class city about 60 miles east of Los Angeles, and opened a proper drive-in restaurant. They called it McDonald's Barbecue. The original McDonald's was like every other drive-in restaurant in America during the early 1940s. It had car hops, young women on roller skates who took orders at your car window and brought food on trays that hooked to your door. The menu was expansive: 25 items including barbecue beef, pork, and ham sandwiches, hamburgers, and 20 different flavors of milkshakes. The kitchen was chaotic, the service was slow, but it was the standard model, and it worked. San Bernardino was the perfect location. It sat on Route 66, the main artery connecting the Midwest to California. Workers from the steel mills, the railroads, and the military bases nearby provided steady business. Families out for a drive on weekends stopped for meals. The McDonald brothers were making good money, about $200,000 annually in gross sales, which was impressive for the era. But Dick and Mac were perfectionists, and they saw problems everywhere. The car hops were unreliable. They quit frequently, showed up late, sometimes flirted with customers or ignored them depending on their mood. The extensive menu meant the kitchen was constantly scrambling, with different items requiring different preparation times and techniques. Orders took 30 minutes or more during busy periods. The complexity created mistakes, waste, and frustration. Moreover, the brothers noticed something about their customer base. About 80% of their sales came from hamburgers. The barbecue items, the elaborate sandwiches, the variety of offerings. Most of it was just complicating their operation without generating proportional revenue. They were running a chaotic, inefficient business when a simple, streamlined operation could be far more profitable. And there was another problem. Their restaurant attracted teenagers who came to socialize, not necessarily to eat. Young people would order a single Coke and occupy space for hours, playing the jukeboxes, smoking, sometimes causing disturbances. The McDonald brothers, both in their 30s and early 40s, were businessmen, not babysitters. They wanted a family restaurant, not a teenage hangout. For 8 years, from 1940 to 1948, the brothers ran their chaotic drive-in, making decent money but feeling increasingly frustrated. They knew something was wrong, that there had to be a better way. But what they couldn't know was that they were about to invent an entirely new industry. In October 1948, Dick and Mac McDonald did something almost unthinkable. They shut down their successful restaurant. They closed the doors, fired all their car hops, and locked themselves inside to completely reimagine what a restaurant could be. For months, they planned, experimented, argued, and refined. Dick, the younger brother, was the visionary, constantly sketching new kitchen layouts and workflows. Mac was the implementer, testing whether Dick's ideas could actually work in practice. Together, they were deconstructing the restaurant business and rebuilding it from first principles. Their revelation was simple but revolutionary. Eliminate everything that didn't contribute directly to serving food quickly and cheaply. First, they cut the menu from 25 items to 9. Hamburgers, cheeseburgers, 3 flavors of soft drinks, milk, coffee, potato chips, later replaced by French fries, and pie. That was it. No barbecue, no elaborate sandwiches, no 20 flavors of shakes, just the items that sold in volume. Second, they eliminated the car hops entirely. Customers would walk up to windows, order, and receive their food within seconds. No tipping, no waiting for service, no unreliable workers. Self-service was almost unheard of in restaurants at the time, but the brothers realized it eliminated the most unpredictable variable in their business. Third, and this was the true genius, they redesigned their kitchen as an assembly line. They studied the factory systems that had made American manufacturing dominant during World War II and applied those principles to making hamburgers. The kitchen became a choreographed performance. One man worked the grill, cooking hamburgers and nothing else. Another man dressed the burgers, buns, ketchup, mustard, pickles, onions, in the exact same way, every single time. Another handled fries. Another managed drinks. Each worker specialized in one task, performed it over and over, became incredibly fast and efficient through pure repetition. The burgers themselves were standardized. 1.6-ounce patties, cooked for precisely the right amount of time, dressed with exactly 2 pickles, a teaspoon of onions, a tablespoon of ketchup, and a specific amount of mustard. Every hamburger was identical. Every time. They redesigned the building itself. The kitchen was visible through large windows. Customers could watch their food being prepared, which built trust and made the operation feel clean and modern. They eliminated everything that attracted loiterers. No jukeboxes, no cigarette machines, no telephones. They wanted families, not teenagers. And the prices, this was perhaps the most radical part, they cut prices in half. A hamburger cost 15 cents instead of 30. The brothers calculated that if they could serve food twice as fast to twice as many customers at half the price, they'd make far more money through volume than they ever had with their expensive, slow, complicated model. They called their system the Speedy Service System, complete with a cartoon mascot, a little chef named Speedy with a hamburger for a head. They painted the building in red and white stripes, installed bright lights, and reopened in December 1948. At first, customers were confused and even angry. Where were the car hops? Why was the menu so limited? Why did they have to get out of their cars? San Bernardino residents had grown accustomed to the old drive-in model, and this strange new format seemed like a downgrade. But then people started to experience the speed. You walked up, ordered a hamburger, and within 30 seconds, sometimes less, you had hot food in your hands. 15 cents for a burger that tasted good, served fast, in a spotlessly clean environment. The value proposition was overwhelming. Within weeks, word spread. Families loved it. Cheap food, quick service, and no teenage crowds. Workers on lunch breaks could get in and out in 5 minutes. The visibility of the kitchen made people trust the cleanliness in a way they never had with traditional restaurants where food preparation happened hidden in back rooms. The hamburgers were good, not gourmet, but consistent, hot, and satisfying. The fries, which the brothers eventually perfected using Idaho russet potatoes cut to precise specifications and cooked in a specific way, became legendary. People drove from miles away just for McDonald's French fries. By 1951, the brothers' single restaurant was generating $275,000 in annual revenue, more than many sit-down restaurants with far larger staffs and facilities. By 1952, that number hit $350,000. The profit margins were astronomical because the labor costs were so low and the waste was almost non-existent. The brothers had accidentally invented fast food. They didn't set out to create a new industry. They just wanted to run a more efficient hamburger stand. But in solving their own operational problems, they discovered a formula that would transform how humans eat. Success attracts attention. Restaurant owners from across California and neighboring states started hearing about the McDonald brothers' miraculous operation. They drove to San Bernardino to see it for themselves, watched in amazement as the assembly line hummed, as customers streamed in and out, as 2 brothers and a small staff produced hundreds of hamburgers per hour. Some of these visitors were just curious. Others were competitors trying to steal ideas. But some were genuine admirers who wanted to replicate the system with the brothers' blessing. In 1952, a man named Neil Fox approached Dick and Mac with a proposal. He wanted to open a McDonald's-style restaurant in Phoenix, Arizona. Could he license their system and their name? The brothers were intrigued. They'd never thought about expansion. They loved San Bernardino, loved their life, had no desire to open more restaurants themselves. But licensing? That could provide income without the headache of managing multiple locations. They agreed to license their name and system to Fox for $1,000. Fox opened his restaurant in Phoenix, and it was successful. Word spread further. Other entrepreneurs approached the brothers with similar requests. By 1954, the McDonald brothers had licensed their system to 21 restaurants in California, Arizona, and a few other western states. But the franchising operation was haphazard. The brothers didn't have a formal system for training franchisees, ensuring quality control, or managing the expansion. Some franchisees followed the McDonald's system precisely and succeeded. Others cut corners, changed recipes, or operated sloppily, which damaged the McDonald's reputation. Dick and Mac didn't particularly care. They were making decent money from franchise fees without much effort, and they still had their original restaurant generating substantial income. They could have pushed for aggressive expansion, could have built a formal franchising operation, could have become wealthy beyond imagination. But they didn't want that life. They were in their 40s and 50s, content with their success, happy in San Bernardino. They played music in their free time, Dick on piano, Mac on bass. They enjoyed their community, their friends, their comfortable existence. Building an empire meant travel, stress, constant work, and the risk of losing what they'd already achieved. The McDonald brothers had built their dream. They'd invented something revolutionary, made enough money to live comfortably, and maintained control of their lives. They were living the American dream, modest, sustainable, content. They had no idea that their contentment would be their downfall. Raymond Albert Kroc was born in 1902 in Oak Park, Illinois, the same year as Mac McDonald. His father was a real estate agent with moderate success, and young Ray grew up middle class but hungry for more. He had ambition that burned like acid in his stomach, a desperate, consuming need to be somebody, to make his mark, to succeed in ways that would make people remember his name. At 15, Kroc lied about his age to join the Red Cross as an ambulance driver during World War I. He never saw combat. The war ended before he could be deployed, but he served alongside another young man who would become famous, Walt Disney. While Disney went on to build an entertainment empire, Kroc returned to Chicago and started grinding through a series of modest careers. He became a piano player, working in nightclubs and radio stations. He was talented but not exceptional. He sold paper cups for 17 years, working for Lily Tulip Cup Company. He was good at sales but never rose beyond middle management. In 1939, at age 37, he heard about a machine called the multi-mixer that could blend 5 milkshakes simultaneously. He acquired the marketing rights and started selling multi-mixers to restaurants and drugstores. The multi-mixer business was modestly successful during the 1940s, riding the post-war boom in dining. But by the early 1950s, sales were declining. Restaurants were buying fewer multi-mixers, and Kroc was struggling. He was 52 years old, ancient by the standards of business success, and he had little to show for decades of work. His marriage to his first wife, Ethel, was loveless and strained. He had health problems, diabetes, incipient arthritis, painful joints that made sleep difficult. He was deeply in debt, borrowing money to keep his multi-mixer business afloat. Younger men were passing him by, achieving the success he craved. The American dream seemed to be slipping away, leaving Ray Kroc as just another aging salesman grinding through his declining years. But inside Kroc burned something dangerous. He refused to accept failure. He worked obsessively, traveled constantly, pitched relentlessly. While other men his age were settling into comfortable retirements or accepting their limitations, Kroc was still fighting, still desperate, still convinced that somewhere, somehow, his opportunity would appear. He just needed to find it. Or steal it. In July 1954, Ray Kroc noticed something strange in his sales records. A single restaurant in San Bernardino, California, a place called McDonald's, had ordered 8 multi-mixers. 8. That meant 40 milkshake spindles running simultaneously. No restaurant needed that kind of capacity unless they were serving an extraordinary volume of shakes. Kroc's salesman instincts flared. He had to see this operation for himself. If one restaurant could sell enough shakes to need 8 multi-mixers, imagine what dozens of similar restaurants could do for his business. He booked a flight to California. When he arrived in San Bernardino and found the McDonald's restaurant, what he witnessed changed his life forever. It was lunchtime, and the scene was unlike anything Kroc had seen in decades of calling on restaurants. There was a line, an actual line of customers, maybe 50 people deep, stretching from the service windows. But the line was moving fast, people stepping up, ordering, receiving food in paper bags within seconds, walking away satisfied. Kroc parked his car and watched. Families, workers in uniform, businessmen, teenagers, elderly couples, everyone was coming to McDonald's. The parking lot was full but constantly churning as customers got their food and left quickly, making room for new arrivals. This wasn't a restaurant, it was a machine that converted customers into revenue at shocking speed. He walked up to the windows and watched the kitchen through the large glass panes. It was hypnotic. Men working in synchronized rhythm, each performing one specific task, the hamburgers moving down the assembly line from grill to dressing to wrapping to customer. No wasted motion, no confusion, no chaos. It was beautiful. Kroc ordered a hamburger, fries, and a shake. 15 cents for the burger. Impossibly cheap. The food appeared in less than a minute. He took a bite. It was hot, fresh, simple but good. The fries were extraordinary, crispy on the outside, fluffy inside, perfectly salted. The shake was thick and cold. But Kroc wasn't thinking about the food. He was having a religious experience, a vision of possibilities that made his hands shake with excitement. This wasn't just a successful restaurant. This was a format that could be reproduced endlessly. A McDonald's could work in Chicago, in New York, in Miami, in Seattle. The system was simple enough that franchisees could replicate it, standardized enough that quality could be controlled, efficient enough that profits would be enormous. Standing in that parking lot, Ray Kroc saw his entire future. At 52 years old, after decades of near success and mounting failure, he'd finally found it. His pathway to wealth, fame, and the success he'd craved his entire life. He just needed to convince the McDonald brothers to let him in. Kroc approached Dick and Mac that same afternoon. He introduced himself as the multi-mixer salesman, praised their operation effusively, and then asked the question that must have seemed obvious to him. Why weren't they expanding more aggressively? The brothers explained their situation. They'd franchised to 21 operators, but it was informal and difficult to control quality. They liked their life in San Bernardino. They were making good money, about $100,000 per year each after all expenses, which was enormous income in 1954, equivalent to roughly $1 million today per brother. They didn't want the stress of managing a national chain. Kroc couldn't understand their contentment. To him, their attitude was madness. They'd invented a gold mine and were content to extract modest wealth when they could be extracting fortunes. He started pitching immediately. He would become their national franchising agent. He would handle everything, finding locations, recruiting franchisees, training them, ensuring quality. They wouldn't have to travel or work harder. They'd just collect royalty checks as McDonald's restaurants opened across America. The brothers were skeptical. They'd heard pitches before from people who wanted to franchise McDonald's. But Kroc was different. His intensity was alarming, his vision was compelling, and his experience as a salesman meant he knew how to build distribution networks. Most importantly, he seemed willing to do all the work while the brothers maintained control of their brand and standards. Over the next several months, Kroc courted the brothers relentlessly. He called constantly, visited repeatedly, wore down their resistance with pure persistence. He promised them wealth, fame, a legacy. He painted pictures of McDonald's restaurants from coast to coast, all generating royalties that would flow to San Bernardino forever. Finally, in early 1955, the brothers agreed. They drafted a contract that seemed to protect everyone's interests. Kroc would be the exclusive franchising agent for McDonald's. He would receive 1.9% of gross sales from all franchised restaurants. Of that 1.9%, he would pay 0.5% to the McDonald brothers. The brothers would retain ownership of the McDonald's name and trademark. The brothers would have approval rights over menu changes and operational standards. Kroc could not make changes to the McDonald's system without the brothers' consent. The contract was signed on March 2, 1955. Ray Kroc immediately began planning his first McDonald's franchise. He chose Des Plaines, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago, as his location. On April 15, 1955, the Des Plaines McDonald's opened for business, the first restaurant in what would become Ray Kroc's empire. That date, April 15, 1955, would later be celebrated as the founding of McDonald's, even though the brothers had been operating for 15 years and had already franchised 21 restaurants. In Kroc's version of history, nothing before his involvement really mattered. The McDonald brothers had just invited a vampire across their threshold. They would spend the rest of their lives regretting it. Ray Kroc attacked franchising with the fervor of a religious convert. He wasn't just selling hamburger restaurants. He was building a crusade for perfect uniformity, for absolute standardization, for McDonald's locations so identical that a customer in Maine would have the exact same experience as one in California. His obsession bordered on pathological. He created the McDonald's Bible, an operations manual that specified every detail of running a McDonald's restaurant. It detailed the exact temperature of the griddle, 350 degrees Fahrenheit, the precise cooking time for French fries, 3 minutes at 325 degrees, the specific number of pickles per hamburger, 2 for regular burgers, even the way employees should greet customers, "May I help you?" and hand them their food with a smile. Kroc hired food scientists to analyze the brothers' original recipes and standardize them. He worked with agricultural experts to source consistent potatoes for fries, only Idaho russets of a specific size, stored at specific temperatures, cut in a specific way. He mandated that all beef had to be fresh, never frozen, ground to precise fat content ratios, formed into patties of exact weight and thickness. He insisted franchisees build restaurants to identical specifications. The red and white tile exteriors, the golden arches, which evolved from an earlier design, the open kitchen, the minimal seating, everything had to match. He personally inspected restaurants, showing up unannounced to check cleanliness, test food quality, observe employee behavior. If he found violations, a dirty bathroom, soggy fries, an employee with a sullen attitude, Kroc would explode with rage. He once saw cigarette butts in a parking lot and forced the franchisee to pick up every piece of trash within 100 yards of the restaurant. He insisted on perfection because he understood that the McDonald's brand depended on absolute trust. Customers had to know that every McDonald's, everywhere, would deliver the same quality. This fanaticism worked. As Kroc opened franchises, first in the Midwest, then spreading outward, customers responded enthusiastically. McDonald's wasn't just cheap and fast, it was reliable. In an era when restaurant quality varied wildly, when you never knew what you'd get at an independent diner, McDonald's offered certainty. A family traveling across America could stop at any McDonald's and know exactly what they'd receive. But while Kroc was building operational perfection, he was going broke. The franchise agreement with the McDonald brothers was financially unsustainable. Kroc received 1.9% of franchisee gross sales, from which he had to pay 0.5% to the brothers, leaving him 1.4%. That 1.4% had to cover finding and evaluating franchise locations, recruiting and vetting franchisees, training programs, quality control inspections, operations manuals and materials, his company's overhead and staff salaries, his own salary. The math didn't work. Franchise fees alone weren't enough. After opening dozens of restaurants, after working 16-hour days for years, Ray Kroc was personally bankrupt. He borrowed money from banks, from friends, from anyone who would lend to him. He took a second mortgage on his home. His wife Ethel begged him to quit, to accept defeat, to find stable employment before he destroyed them financially. But Kroc refused. He'd found his opportunity, the thing he'd been searching for his entire life, and he would rather die than abandon it. He just needed to find a way to make money from McDonald's beyond the franchise fees. And then, in 1956, he had his revelation. Harry Sonneborn, a financial consultant Kroc hired, pointed out the obvious. Kroc couldn't make money from the franchise agreement, so he needed to make money from something else. The solution was real estate. Here's how the scheme worked. Kroc created a separate company called Franchise Realty Corporation, later renamed McDonald's Real Estate Company. This company would find locations for new McDonald's restaurants, lease or purchase the land and building, sublease the property to the franchisee at a markup. The franchisees would pay rent directly to Kroc's real estate company, rent that was completely separate from the franchise fees covered in the McDonald Brothers agreement. The brothers received their 0.5% of gross sales as specified in the contract, but they received nothing from the real estate operation. This was the key to everything. While franchise fees barely kept Kroc's company alive, the real estate income generated massive profits. Franchisees paid substantial monthly rent, often $500 to $1,000 per month, equivalent to $5,000 to $10,000 today, directly to Kroc. Over the course of a year, the real estate income from a single franchise could exceed the total franchise fees from multiple restaurants. Moreover, as McDonald's restaurants succeeded, the real estate itself appreciated in value. Kroc's company was accumulating one of the largest real estate portfolios in America, owning or controlling prime commercial locations in cities and suburbs nationwide. The McDonald brothers, sitting in San Bernardino, had no idea this was happening. They received their franchise fee checks, modest amounts, a few $100s from each restaurant, and assumed that was the extent of the money being generated. They didn't realize that Kroc had discovered a separate revenue stream that was making him wealthy while they remained comfortably but not spectacularly compensated. By the late 1950s, McDonald's real estate company was the engine driving Kroc's empire. The franchising operation had become almost secondary, a means of recruiting operators for the real estate holdings. Kroc later said, "We're not in the food business, we're in the real estate business." He'd found a way to build his fortune entirely outside the McDonald brothers' contract. And they had no legal recourse because the real estate operation wasn't covered in their agreement. As Kroc's operation grew and his financial situation stabilized, his relationship with the McDonald brothers deteriorated into mutual loathing. Every interaction became a battle. The brothers, protective of their creation and their reputation, insisted on maintaining control over the McDonald system. They reviewed Kroc's franchise proposals, rejected candidates they deemed unsuitable, and refused menu additions they thought would compromise quality or efficiency. Kroc chafed under their authority. He viewed them as small-minded obstacles, dinosaurs clinging to outdated ideas, men too stupid to recognize his genius. He wanted to add new menu items, coffee and donuts for breakfast, for example, but the brothers resisted, arguing it would complicate the streamlined system. Kroc seethed. He began calling them, "those damned brothers," in private. He complained to his staff that Dick and Mac were holding back progress, preventing McDonald's from achieving its full potential. In Kroc's mind, he was the true visionary, and the brothers were dead weight he was forced to drag along because of a contract he'd signed when he was desperate. The brothers, meanwhile, watched Kroc's operation with growing alarm. They saw him making changes they hadn't approved, pushing franchisees toward practices that violated the original McDonald's philosophy, prioritizing expansion over quality. They realized they'd made a catastrophic error. They'd given control to a man who didn't respect them and was building something they could no longer influence. The phone calls between San Bernardino and Chicago became hostile. The brothers would insist on their contractual rights. Kroc would argue, manipulate, sometimes simply ignore them and apologize later. The relationship was toxic, held together only by legal contracts and mutual financial dependence. By 1960, Kroc openly fantasized about getting rid of the brothers entirely. He wanted total control of McDonald's, no partners, no oversight, no one questioning his decisions. The brothers wanted out, they were exhausted, stressed, and Mac's health was failing. But neither side could figure out how to separate without destroying what they'd built. By 1960, McDonald's had exploded far beyond what the brothers had imagined. There were more than 200 restaurants operating or under construction across America. The Golden Arches were becoming recognizable nationwide. The system was generating millions in revenue annually. For Ray Kroc, through his real estate operation, this meant wealth. His company was profitable, his personal finances had recovered, and he could see the pathway to becoming genuinely rich, perhaps even building a fortune that would make him one of America's business elite. But the McDonald brothers remained a problem. Legally, they owned the McDonald's trademark and name. They had veto power over major operational decisions. And most infuriating to Kroc, their very existence reminded everyone that McDonald's wasn't really his creation. He was just the guy who'd franchised someone else's concept. McDonald's health was deteriorating. He had diabetes and was showing symptoms of what would later be identified as a degenerative illness. Dick was exhausted from years of fighting with Kroc, tired of the stress, sick of watching their creation being transformed into something they barely recognized. In early 1960, Kroc approached them with a proposition. He would buy them out entirely. They could name their price, walk away wealthy, retire comfortably, and leave McDonald's to him. No more arguments, no more stress, no more partnership. Just a clean break. The brothers were tempted. They were in their 50s, tired, and ready for peace. If Kroc would pay them enough to live comfortably for the rest of their lives, they would gladly hand over McDonald's and return to the quiet life they'd always preferred. The negotiations stretched over months and were brutal. The brothers opened by asking for $2.7 million total, $1.35 million for each brother. In 1961, this was an enormous sum, equivalent to roughly $25 million in today's money. For two men who'd started with a hot dog stand, it represented unimaginable wealth. Kroc countered that the price was too high. McDonald's, despite its growth, was still heavily leveraged through all the real estate holdings. Kroc claimed he didn't have that kind of money readily available and would need to arrange financing. The brothers suspected he was lying. They'd heard through industry sources that McDonald's real estate was highly profitable, but they had no way to verify his claims. They negotiated back and forth. Kroc wouldn't budge on the $2.7 million figure. He claimed that was the absolute maximum he could finance. The brothers, desperate to escape the situation and not skilled in high-stakes negotiation, agreed to the price. But then the brothers made two additional requests, and this is where the true betrayal occurred. First, they wanted to keep their original restaurant in San Bernardino. It was their baby, the birthplace of everything, the place where they'd invented fast food. They didn't want it to be part of Kroc's McDonald's chain. They'd rename it, remove any McDonald's branding, but they wanted to keep operating their original restaurant for as long as they chose. It was their property, purchased long before Kroc arrived, and they saw no reason they should have to sell it. Second, and more importantly, they wanted an ongoing royalty. They proposed that they receive 1% of McDonald's gross revenue in perpetuity, a royalty recognizing that this was their creation, their innovation, their system that had built the empire. Even after selling the company, they felt entitled to ongoing compensation for the value they'd created. Kroc agreed to both requests. They shook hands on the deal. Everyone smiled. The lawyers began preparing the final contracts. When the lawyers presented the final purchase agreement, the 1% royalty wasn't in the document. The brothers immediately protested. Kroc had agreed. They'd shaken hands. The royalty was part of the deal. The lawyers explained, with corporate blandness, that the royalty arrangement would need to be disclosed to McDonald's investors and creditors. It would complicate the company's financial structure, potentially affecting Kroc's ability to secure financing for the buyout. It would create ongoing entanglements that would undermine the clean break everyone wanted. Kroc shrugged. The agreement wasn't in writing. If they wanted the $2.7 million buyout, they'd have to accept it without the royalty. Take it or leave it. Dick and McDonald were trapped. They'd already mentally committed to selling, already told friends and family they were retiring, already made plans for their lives after McDonald's. Kroc knew they were exhausted and desperate to escape. He had them cornered, and he squeezed. The brothers signed the contract without the royalty clause. That 1% royalty, that handshake agreement that Kroc simply ignored, would have been worth billions of dollars. In 1970, it would have generated $3 million annually. In 1980, $30 million. In 1990, over $100 million per year. Today, it would generate approximately $240 million annually. Over the decades since 1961, that 1% royalty would have paid out more than $10 billion. Ray Kroc stole $10 billion with a handshake and a lie. But the betrayal wasn't finished. Remember the brothers' original restaurant in San Bernardino? The one they were allowed to keep as part of the buyout agreement? There was a catch Kroc had carefully structured into the contract. The brothers could keep the property and continue operating a restaurant. However, they could not use the name McDonald's or any McDonald's branding. The name was part of what Kroc had purchased. Fine, the brothers said, they'd rename it. They called it the Big M. It was their restaurant, on their property, serving the original McDonald's recipes to loyal customers who'd been coming since 1948. The brothers thought they could at least maintain this small piece of their legacy. Ray Kroc couldn't allow it. The existence of the brothers' restaurant, even under a different name, was an implicit reminder that McDonald's wasn't his creation. Customers in San Bernardino knew the truth. The McDonald brothers had invented fast food, and Kroc was just the guy who'd franchised it. That truth ate at Kroc like acid. Within 6 months of the buyout, Kroc arranged for a new McDonald's franchise to open directly across the street from the Big M. Think about the calculation behind this. Kroc now owned McDonald's, controlled hundreds of restaurants, and was building a national empire. The brothers' single restaurant posed no competitive threat whatsoever. But Kroc opened a franchise across the street for one reason: to destroy them. The new McDonald's had the golden arches, the national brand recognition, the full marketing support of the corporate operation. The Big M was just a local restaurant run by two aging brothers. Customers, especially newcomers to San Bernardino, naturally gravitated to the real McDonald's. The Big M's business declined steadily. The brothers watched helplessly as customers crossed the street to the McDonald's franchise. Within a few years, unable to compete with the corporate juggernaut, Dick and Mac were forced to close their original restaurant. The birthplace of fast food, the restaurant where Dick and Mac McDonald had invented the speedy service system, where they created the template for every fast food restaurant in the world, was driven out of business by the empire built on their innovation. Dick McDonald later recalled this final betrayal with quiet bitterness. "I opened the door for Ray Kroc, and he walked right past me." With the brothers bought out and silenced, Ray Kroc set about rewriting history. He positioned himself not as the franchising agent who'd stolen someone else's creation, but as the founder and visionary who'd built McDonald's from nothing. In speeches, interviews, and eventually his 1977 autobiography, Grinding It Out, Kroc described the McDonald brothers as small-time operators who'd stumbled onto a good idea but lacked the vision and capability to build it into something great. He portrayed himself as the genius who'd seen potential where others saw just another hamburger stand. Part V, The Rewriting of History, continued. In Kroc's version of events, which became the official McDonald's corporate history, the story went like this. Ray Kroc discovered a small but efficient hamburger restaurant run by two brothers who were content with their modest success. Kroc saw the potential for a national chain and convinced the reluctant brothers to let him franchise their concept. Through his tireless work, his business genius, and his unwavering commitment to quality, Kroc transformed McDonald's from a single restaurant into the world's largest food service organization. It was a compelling narrative, the story of American entrepreneurship, of vision triumphing over complacency, of one man's determination changing an industry. Business schools taught it. Magazines celebrated it. Kroc became a symbol of what hard work and innovation could achieve. What this narrative conveniently omitted. The brothers had already franchised 21 restaurants before Kroc arrived. Every operational innovation, the speedy service system, the assembly line kitchen, the limited menu, the standardized procedures, was invented by Dick and Mac McDonald. The real estate scheme that made Kroc wealthy was separate from and hidden from the brothers' contractual agreement. Kroc had promised the brothers an ongoing royalty and then simply refused to honor it. Kroc had deliberately destroyed the brothers' original restaurant out of spite. The golden arches became Kroc's symbol, not the brothers'. The April 15, 1955 opening of the Des Plaines restaurant became the founding of McDonald's, erasing 15 years of the brothers' work. McDonald's corporate anniversaries, promotional materials, and historical accounts dated the company's origin to Kroc's involvement, not to 1940 or 1948 when the brothers actually founded and revolutionized their restaurant. The McDonald brothers became footnotes, mentioned briefly in official histories as the original operators or two brothers in California, before the real story began with Ray Kroc. Dick and Mac McDonald, for their part, largely remained silent about the betrayal. They'd signed non-disparagement agreements as part of the buyout, which legally limited what they could say publicly about Kroc or McDonald's. More importantly, they were private men who'd never sought publicity or fame. They weren't fighters by nature. They were inventors and operators. Mac McDonald died in 1971 at age 69, his health destroyed by diabetes and the stress of watching his creation stolen. He died early enough to be spared witnessing the full magnitude of what McDonald's would become, and what he'd lost. Dick McDonald lived until 1998, surviving to age 89. For nearly 4 decades, he watched McDonald's grow from hundreds of restaurants to tens of thousands, watched the Golden Arches become one of the most recognized symbols on earth, watched Ray Kroc celebrated as a business genius and visionary. In the few interviews Dick gave later in life, he spoke with remarkable restraint. He didn't rage or attack Kroc publicly. He simply stated facts. We had created the concept. Kroc just spread it around. He got the credit, but we had done the work. When asked about the missing royalty agreement, Dick said simply, "I would have been worth $100 million today if we had held on to that agreement." By the time he died in 1998, that 1% royalty would actually have been worth far more, likely billions in accumulated payments. Dick spent his final decades living modestly in a small house in New Hampshire, having moved back to his home state after Mac's death. He wasn't bitter exactly, just sad, resigned, carrying the quiet knowledge that he and his brother had built something world-changing and received almost nothing for it. Meanwhile, Ray Kroc and McDonald's Corporation marched toward global dominance. Through the 1960s and 1970s, McDonald's expanded at an explosive rate. By 1965, 700 restaurants. By 1970, 1,500 restaurants. By 1975, 3,000 restaurants. By 1980, 6,200 restaurants. The company went public in 1965, and the stock price soared. Early investors, including Kroc himself, became phenomenally wealthy. The franchise model proved endlessly scalable. McDonald's could open restaurants in suburban strip malls, urban centers, highway rest stops, airports, even military bases. Everywhere humans gathered, a McDonald's could thrive. Kroc introduced innovations that the brothers had resisted. The Big Mac was added in 1968, created by a franchisee but rolled out nationally. The Egg McMuffin launched breakfast service in 1972, opening an entirely new daypart for revenue. Happy Meals, McDonaldland characters, aggressive marketing to children, all tactics the brothers would have opposed but which drove massive growth. The company's marketing became legendary. "You deserve a break today," and 2 all-beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun became cultural touchstones. Ronald McDonald became more recognizable to children than most real public figures. McDonald's transcended being a restaurant. It became a cultural institution, a symbol of American consumer culture, both celebrated and criticized in equal measure. By the time Ray Kroc died in 1984, McDonald's had over 7,500 restaurants in 31 countries and was generating billions in annual revenue. Kroc's personal fortune exceeded $500 million. He died wealthy, celebrated, and convinced that he'd earned every penny through his vision and hard work. Kroc's third wife, Joan Kroc, inherited his fortune, approximately $3 billion after his death and subsequent appreciation of McDonald's stock. Joan was, by all accounts, a genuinely kind person who'd married Ray late in his life and had complicated feelings about the source of her wealth. She became one of America's great philanthropists, giving away nearly her entire fortune before her death in 2003. She donated $1.5 billion to the Salvation Army for community centers, $225 million to National Public Radio, $50 million to the University of Notre Dame, hundreds of millions more to medical research, poverty relief, and peace initiatives. Joan Kroc's philanthropy was genuine and impactful. She used McDonald's fortune to fund homeless shelters, research facilities, and community programs that improved millions of lives. In a strange way, the money that Ray Kroc had essentially stolen from the McDonald brothers ended up doing enormous good in the world through Joan's generosity. But this doesn't change the fundamental injustice. The brothers who actually invented fast food died with modest wealth, while the man who stole their creation became a billionaire whose widow gave away fortunes to charity. The blood money did good works, but it was still built on theft. After Kroc's death, McDonald's continued its relentless expansion under corporate leadership. The company went international in a serious way, planting golden arches in countries where hamburgers had never existed. Moscow in 1990, the first McDonald's in the Soviet Union, where 38,000 people showed up on opening day. Beijing in 1992, introducing fast food to the world's most populous nation. India in 1996, adapting the menu to cultural sensitivities with vegetarian options. By the 2000s, McDonald's operated in over 100 countries, serving roughly 70 million customers daily. The menu had expanded far beyond Dick and Mac's original 9 items: wraps, salads, specialty coffee drinks, regional variations to accommodate local tastes. The brothers wouldn't recognize it as their creation anymore. McDonald's became more than a restaurant chain. It became a symbol of globalization itself, both its promises and its threats. The Golden Arches theory of conflict prevention proposed, half-jokingly, that no two countries with McDonald's had ever gone to war, suggesting that economic integration promoted peace. Protesters around the world attacked McDonald's as a symbol of American cultural imperialism, homogenization, and corporate power. The company faced criticism for contributing to obesity epidemics, for environmental damage, for labor practices. Books like Fast Food Nation exposed the industrial food system behind the cheerful marketing. Documentaries like Super Size Me attacked McDonald's role in public health crises. Through it all, the Golden Arches endured. People kept eating there, billions and billions served, as the signs once proclaimed. McDonald's adapted, adding healthier options, modernizing restaurants, embracing technology with mobile ordering and delivery. The company stumbled occasionally but never fell, remaining one of the world's most valuable brands. And through it all, almost no one knew that the M in McDonald's stood for 2 brothers from New Hampshire who'd invented the entire concept and died without appropriate recognition or compensation. The erasure of the McDonald brothers from their own story represents a particular type of American historical amnesia. We love narratives of individual genius, of the self-made entrepreneur who builds empires through vision and determination. Ray Kroc fit that narrative perfectly. The struggling salesman who discovered opportunity and built a global empire through relentless work. The true story, of systematic invention by collaborative brothers, followed by calculated theft by a franchising agent, is messier, less inspiring, harder to package into motivational speeches at business conferences. So the culture chose Kroc's version, and the brothers disappeared. This pattern repeats throughout American business history. Thomas Edison is celebrated as the inventor of the light bulb, though much of the work was done by his team, and he actively destroyed competitors like Nikola Tesla. Steve Jobs is lionized as a technological visionary, though Steve Wozniak actually built the first Apple computers and many other engineers created the innovations Apple marketed. The pattern is clear. The promoter gets the credit, the inventor gets forgotten. The salesman's name goes on the building, while the engineer who actually made it work becomes a footnote. American capitalism rewards the person who captures value more than the person who creates it. In 2016, a film called The Founder was released, starring Michael Keaton as Ray Kroc. The movie, based on extensive research and interviews, including with Dick McDonald before his death, told the real story. The brothers' innovation, Kroc's manipulation, the broken promises, the betrayal. The film didn't portray Kroc as a simple villain. Michael Keaton's performance captured Kroc's genuine obsession with quality, his exhausting work ethic, his ability to see possibilities others missed. But it also didn't shy away from showing his ruthlessness, his contempt for the brothers, his willingness to lie and cheat to get what he wanted. Critical response was generally positive, but the film wasn't a major commercial success. Audiences seemed unsure what to do with a story where the successful protagonist is also the villain, where the American dream is achieved through exploitation rather than innovation. More importantly, the movie came 60 years too late for Dick and Mac McDonald. They'd both died without seeing their story honestly told to a mass audience, without receiving recognition for what they'd actually created, without the culture acknowledging the injustice done to them. It's worth pausing to enumerate exactly what Dick and Mac McDonald created, because the specificity of their innovation is often lost in general statements about founding McDonald's. The speedy service system, the assembly line approach to food preparation, where each worker specializes in one task, allowing for unprecedented speed and consistency. The limited menu, understanding that reducing choices increases efficiency, lowers costs, and allows for perfection in execution. This was revolutionary. Most restaurants maximized menu variety, not minimized it. Self-service fast food, eliminating car hops and table service, making customers come to the restaurant, which reduced labor costs and increased throughput. The price, speed, quality triangle. Figuring out that you could offer food at half the normal price by serving it twice as fast, and that speed and value would drive volume that made low margins profitable. Visible kitchen operations. Installing large windows so customers could watch food preparation, building trust through transparency. Standardized specifications. Every element of food preparation, cooking times, temperatures, portion sizes, assembly procedures, was standardized and documented. This made replication possible. The family-friendly fast food environment, eliminating jukeboxes, telephones, and other teenager attractors to create a space where families felt comfortable. Architectural branding. The distinctive red and white tile building with the golden arches evolved from earlier designs that made McDonald's instantly recognizable. Every single one of these innovations came from the brothers. Ray Kroc added operational fanaticism, real estate innovation, and marketing genius. But the fundamental concept, the core business model, the entire system was their creation. To understand how Ray Kroc could steal an empire and sleep at night, you have to understand how he saw himself. In Kroc's mind, he wasn't a thief, he was a savior. He'd rescued a brilliant concept from men too timid to maximize its potential. Without him, McDonald's would have remained a regional curiosity, perhaps 20 or 30 restaurants concentrated in California and Arizona. Kroc genuinely believed this. He looked at the brothers' contentment and saw cowardice. He looked at their desire to maintain quality and saw small-mindedness. He looked at their resistance to his expansion plans and saw obstacles to progress that needed to be overcome. In his autobiography, Kroc wrote, "I was convinced that the best way to reach the maximum of our potential was to find ways to reduce our cost of operations. If we could do that without jeopardizing our standards, we would improve our profit performance and be able to grow." Notice the language, our potential, our cost, our standards, we would improve. He'd completely erased the brothers from the story, absorbing their creation into his identity. This is the psychology of the successful ruthless entrepreneur, the ability to reframe exploitation as necessary evolution. The brothers were holding back progress, so removing them was actually beneficial. They got paid $2.7 million, which was generous compensation for a single restaurant and some franchises. The fact that Kroc built the company into something worth billions just proved he'd been right to take control. Kroc never expressed remorse or guilt about the broken royalty promise. When asked about it in interviews, he dismissed it as a business decision. The royalty arrangement wasn't practical, and the brothers had been adequately compensated. The handshake meant nothing because it wasn't in writing. That's just business. But Ray Kroc didn't steal McDonald's alone. He was enabled by systems and structures that made the theft legal and even admirable. Legal contracts. The franchise agreement Kroc negotiated gave him enormous power while leaving the brothers with limited control. Later, the buyout agreement removed them entirely without requiring him to honor informal promises. American contract law protects the written word, not handshakes or moral obligations. Corporate structure. The real estate operation that made Kroc wealthy was entirely separate from his agreement with the brothers. By creating separate corporate entities, he could build wealth outside their contractual relationship. This wasn't illegal. It was clever financial engineering. Cultural values. American business culture celebrates the aggressive entrepreneur who sees opportunities others miss and exploits them ruthlessly. Kroc's behavior wasn't seen as theft. It was seen as vision, as the kind of bold action that builds empires. Information asymmetry. The brothers didn't understand modern franchising, real estate financing, or corporate structure. Kroc did. He used his superior knowledge to structure deals that benefited him while appearing fair on the surface. The myth of meritocracy. American culture wants to believe that wealth reflects merit, that successful people deserve their success through superior talent, work ethic, or vision. Acknowledging that Kroc stole his fortune would undermine this comforting myth, so the culture chooses to believe his version of events. The McDonald brothers' downfall was their contentment. They'd achieved their dreams, financial security, creative satisfaction, control of their own lives. They weren't driven by unlimited ambition, by the need to conquer markets or build empires. They just wanted to run a good restaurant and live comfortably. In American capitalism, contentment is weakness. It's seen as a lack of ambition, a failure of vision, an unwillingness to maximize potential. The brothers were happy making $100,000 each per year, equivalent to $1 million today. Extraordinary income by any normal standard. But to people like Ray Kroc, leaving money on the table, not maximizing every opportunity, represented a kind of moral failure. The brothers didn't want to travel constantly, open restaurants personally, manage a sprawling organization. They valued their time, their peace, their local community. These values, which most humans would consider healthy and admirable, made them vulnerable to someone who valued nothing except growth, expansion, and success. If the McDonald brothers had been as ruthless as Ray Kroc, they could have protected themselves. They could have negotiated better contracts, created corporate structures that protected their interests, maintained control of franchising while hiring managers to handle the work. But they weren't ruthless. They were inventors who loved their creation and made the fatal error of trusting a salesman who promised to help them while plotting to take everything. Was what Ray Kroc did illegal? No. Immoral? Absolutely. But American capitalism has never required morality, only legality. Kroc operated within the law, used contracts and corporate structures available to anyone, and built his fortune through mechanisms that were perfectly legal. Should the brothers have protected themselves better? Yes. They were naive about business, too trusting, insufficiently suspicious. A better lawyer, more careful contract negotiation, or simple paranoia about Kroc's intentions could have protected their interests. But asking whether the brothers should have protected themselves better is like asking whether a robbery victim should have installed better locks. It's technically true but morally irrelevant. The person who committed the wrong was Ray Kroc, not the McDonald brothers. They created something valuable and were robbed of appropriate compensation and recognition. That's theft, regardless of whether it was legal. As of 2025, McDonald's Corporation operates or franchises approximately 42,000 restaurants in over 100 countries. The company serves roughly 70 million customers daily and employs approximately 2 million people worldwide. Annual revenue exceeds $25 billion, with system-wide sales, including franchisee revenue, topping $130 billion. The company's market capitalization fluctuates but typically exceeds $200 billion, making it one of the most valuable corporations in the world. McDonald's real estate holdings, the foundation of Ray Kroc's empire, are worth tens of billions of dollars. The menu has expanded far beyond hamburgers and French fries. McDonald's serves breakfast all day in many markets, offers salads and wraps for health-conscious consumers, adapts to local tastes with regional specialties, and has embraced technology with mobile ordering, delivery services, and automated kiosks. The company faces ongoing challenges: health concerns about fast food, labor disputes over wages and working conditions, environmental criticism about waste and sustainability, and changing consumer preferences toward fresher, more local food options. But McDonald's adapts and endures, a global colossus built on a foundation invented by two brothers in San Bernardino. Let's do the mathematics on what that 1% royalty, the one Ray Kroc promised in a handshake and then refused to honor, would actually be worth. 1961 to 1970. McDonald's grew rapidly but was still primarily a U.S. operation. A 1% royalty would have generated approximately $500,000 to $3 million annually during this period. Cumulative. $15 million. 1970 to 1980. Major international expansion began. The 1% royalty would have generated approximately $3 million to $30 million annually. Cumulative. $165 million. 1980 to 1990. McDonald's became a global giant. The 1% royalty would have generated approximately $30 million to $120 million annually. Cumulative. $750 million. 1990 to 2000. Continued global expansion. The 1% royalty would have generated approximately $120 million to $180 million annually. Cumulative. $1.5 billion. 2000 to 2010. System-wide sales exploded as McDonald's penetrated developing markets. The 1% royalty would have generated approximately $180 million to $250 million annually. Cumulative. $2.15 billion. 2010 to 2025. McDonald's solidified its position as the world's largest restaurant chain. The 1% royalty would have generated approximately $250 million to $350 million annually. Cumulative. $4.5 billion. Total cumulative value from 1961 to 2025. approximately $9 billion in direct royalty payments, not accounting for any investment of those funds. If the brothers had invested those royalty payments conservatively in index funds or bonds, the compounded value would exceed $20 billion today. If they'd reinvested in McDonald's stock itself, the value could exceed $50 billion. Ray Kroc's handshake lie cost the McDonald brothers and their heirs somewhere between $9 billion and $50 billion, depending on how the money would have been managed. In San Bernardino, there's a small museum dedicated to the original McDonald's restaurant, the one the brothers opened in 1940 and revolutionized in 1948. It's a modest building, maintained by local history enthusiasts, visited by McDonald's fans and historians. But McDonald's Corporation has never officially honored the brothers in any significant way. There are no statues of Dick and Mac at corporate headquarters. The company's official history mentions them briefly and moves quickly to Ray Kroc's involvement. When McDonald's celebrates milestones, they count from 1955, not 1940 or 1948. The brothers never received industry awards for their innovation. They were never inducted into business halls of fame. No major biographies were written about them during their lifetimes. They invented an industry and died in obscurity while the man who stole their creation was celebrated worldwide. Dick McDonald gave a few interviews in his later years, speaking carefully about what had happened. He never attacked Kroc directly, perhaps bound by legal agreements, perhaps just temperamentally averse to conflict. But his sadness was evident. He'd watch McDonald's commercials, see the golden arches, know that every person eating at McDonald's was participating in a system he and his brother had created, and receive nothing. The McDonald's story offers a brutal lesson for inventors, creators, and innovators. Creation alone is not enough. You must also control, protect, and capitalize on what you create. The McDonald brothers were brilliant systems thinkers who revolutionized food service. But they were terrible at negotiating contracts that protected their interests, understanding corporate and financial structures, recognizing exploitation until it was too late, maintaining control of their intellectual property, thinking strategically about long-term value. Ray Kroc wasn't particularly innovative. He didn't invent anything the brothers hadn't already created. But he was excellent at identifying undervalued opportunities, negotiating contracts that maximized his benefit, creating financial structures that generated wealth, marketing and selling concepts to others, thinking strategically about scaling and growth. In capitalism, the second set of skills is rewarded more than the first. The McDonald brothers should be billionaires, celebrated as pioneers who changed how humans eat. Instead, they died modestly while the franchising agent who stole their creation became a legend. Every inventor, entrepreneur, or creative person should study this story as a cautionary tale. Protect your interests legally, understand the financial implications of every agreement, trust no one's handshake, and recognize that the person offering to help you build your dreams may actually be planning to steal them. The McDonald's story is ultimately about two different visions of success, two different types of ambition, two different philosophies of life. Dick and Mac McDonald built a dream. They wanted to create something excellent, make enough money to live comfortably, maintain control of their creation, and preserve their quality of life. They valued craftsmanship over empire, contentment over conquest, balance over wealth maximization. They achieved exactly what they wanted, until someone took it from them. Ray Kroc built a machine. He wanted growth, expansion, dominance, wealth, recognition as one of the great businessmen of his era. He valued ambition over contentment, saw opportunities where others saw sufficient success, and was willing to do whatever necessary to achieve his vision. He achieved exactly what he wanted, by stealing someone else's creation. American culture has consistently celebrated Kroc and forgotten the brothers because we're culturally predisposed to admire the machine over the dream. We value unlimited ambition over contentment, aggressive expansion over sustainable success, the person who builds empires over the person who creates something excellent and then enjoys it. But there's a darkness at the heart of this cultural preference. Ray Kroc didn't create McDonald's, he stole it. The golden arches represent innovation stolen, promises broken, handshakes betrayed. Every hamburger sold, every franchise opened, every $1 billion in market capitalization is built on that foundation of theft. The brothers built the dream. Ray Kroc built the machine. And the machine didn't just surpass the dream, It devoured it, destroyed it, erased it from history, and then claimed credit for its creation. That's the real story of April 15, 1955. Not the founding of McDonald's, but the beginning of one of the greatest thefts in American business history. The day when ambition defeated contentment, when the promoter eclipsed the creator, when a salesman stole an empire and convinced the world he'd built it himself. The McDonald brothers deserve to be remembered not as footnotes to Ray Kroc's story, but as the inventors who changed the world, and as a warning about what happens when creators trust the wrong person to help them build their dreams. They built the dream. He built the machine. And sometimes, the machine wins.